My name is Sarah, and I'm a nature enthusiast from Ohio. Last summer, I embarked on a solo road trip to explore the scenic beauty of the southern states. North Carolina was one of the stops on my journey, and little did I know that I was about to have an encounter that would leave me questioning the boundaries of what we consider real and unknown. It was mid-August when I arrived in the small town of Blackwood, nestled deep within the lush forests of North Carolina. The town had a charm that resonated with me, and its proximity to the Great Smoky Mountains made it an ideal base for my outdoor adventures. The locals were warm and welcoming, always ready to share stories about the wilderness that surrounded their lives. One afternoon, as I was hiking along a secluded trail, I noticed the forest had an eerie stillness. The usual chorus of birdsong had faded away, leaving only the sound of my footsteps on the path. A shiver ran down my spine, but I brushed it off as a trick of my imagination. As I continued deeper into the woods, the sunlight dimmed, and a sense of unease settled upon me. The atmosphere grew heavy, as if nature itself held its breath. I felt a primal instinct urging me to turn back, but my curiosity pushed me forward. A sudden rustling in the underbrush broke the silence, making me freeze in my tracks. My heart raced, and beads of sweat formed on my forehead. I strained my ears, trying to discern the source of the disturbance. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the dense foliage. My gaze fixated on the creature emerging from the undergrowth. It stood about 6 feet tall, towering over me with a primal grace. Its body resembled that of a large ape, but its features were distinctly different. Its limbs were elongated, covered in short, coarse hair that glistened under the dappled sunlight. Its head was rounded with a wide, flat nose and deep-set, intelligent eyes that seemed to study me. The creature's arms were long and muscular, ending in hands that possessed a haunting resemblance to human appendages. Each finger was tipped with sharp claws that glistened in the subdued light. It moved with an uncanny blend of agility and power, its steps silent, as if it were gliding across the forest floor. Fear and fascination gripped me as I watched the enigmatic creature go about its business. It seemed oblivious to my presence, focused instead on foraging for berries and leaves. Occasionally, it would pause, its head tilting inquisitively, as if it sensed something I couldn't comprehend. Time stood still as I observed this creature, this unknown being that defied all rational explanation. My mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what I was witnessing. What could this creature be? Was it an undiscovered species? Or perhaps a remnant of an ancient era hidden away in the depths of the forest? Eventually, the creature vanished into the undergrowth, disappearing as swiftly and mysteriously as it had appeared. Left alone with my thoughts, I retraced my steps back to Blackwood, my mind buzzing with a mix of awe and trepidation. When I returned to town, I shared my encounter with the locals. Some dismissed it as a mere figment of my imagination, while others nodded knowingly, acknowledging the existence of such beings beyond the realm of our understanding. To this day, I carry the memory of that encounter with me, forever imprinted in my mind. The enigma of that unknown creature in the North Carolina forest has left an indelible mark, reminding me that the world still holds mysteries waiting to be uncovered. And although my encounter lacked concrete proof, it reinforced my belief that there are realms of existence that remain hidden, silently coexisting with our own. In 1981, I was working as a Yellowstone park ranger. I was assigned to the Mammoth area of the park, which is located in northwest Wyoming. The area is very remote, and there are no roads leading into it. It was only accessible at the time by helicopter or horseback, so it was very hard to get help if you needed it out there. I had been working in that area for about 2 years when I began hearing stories from some of my coworkers about strange things going on at night around some of the backcountry campsites. Specifically, near Lake Village, which is located near Mammoth Hot Springs and west of Norris Geyser Basin, also known as the hottest geothermal basin in Yellowstone. One of my coworkers told me that he had been out on patrol one night and was riding his horse through the backcountry when he came across a campsite where there were 2 people apparently sleeping in their tent. As he approached, the tent flapped open, and a woman popped out and looked at him for a few seconds, then quickly ducked back into the tent. He said she didn't say anything to him or make any noise. She just stared at him with wide, blackened eyes from inside her tent and began muttering something in a language he had never heard. He said he was so freaked out by this because he was convinced that she wasn't entirely human. As he put it, he could not explain it and understood that it sounded ridiculous, but he said there was just something really off about the whole thing, and his insides were screaming in the pit of his gut that he needed to leave. He also mentioned how there were these strange, wooden hex-like trinkets, as he called them, hung up all around the makeshift campsite, and that the odor of rotting meat was so strong. He was so spooked by this experience that he just decided to leave and head back to Lake Village as fast as he could. After hearing that story, I began taking a closer look at the area around the campsites in the backcountry, and even noticed several more of these strange wooden trinkets hanging up on the trees in some of these sites. Some of them looked like they were made out of tree bark and had strange symbolism carved into them. It kind of reminded me of what you'd see in the modern-day Blair Witch Project. I didn't know what these things were, but I thought it was odd that people were hanging them up in the trees in the middle of nowhere. One night, a few of us heard some very loud and disturbing noises out in the woods near one of the campsites. It sounded like there was a group of people screaming and shouting and lots of commotion all at once. But then there were also sounds underneath it, like animals howling and more commotion. I could tell that the horses were becoming frightened by this, so we grabbed our rifles and loaded up and headed to the area as fast as we could to go investigate. We would later come back to that site with a group of rangers and thoroughly investigate what had happened. We had found a large number of footprints near one of our camps where we had heard the noises. We saw everything from various bare footprints intermixed with animal prints. Upon closer inspection, the tracks appeared to be canine in nature and large. This could only mean one thing: wolves. But this was 1981, so remember that wolves were not reintroduced into Yellowstone until the mid-1990s. Even more bizarre, these tracks were in sets of 2 or bipedal, and they also appeared to walk parallel with the bare human feet tracks that we found. None of us knew how to really explain what we found that night, and there were no other signs of anybody being there. I mean, there were no fire pits, no tents, nothing. We found more strange wooden trinkets that gave us this unsettling energy, as a few of us had put it. Going into 1982 is when we began to notice a substantial increase in bizarre, unexplained activity. I myself can only attribute this to occult activity and satanic rituals. There were other encounters reported by various colleagues of mine, more strange noises that could not be explained, more trinkets, and occult symbolism found in the backcountry. There were even possessed horses that would attack their riders, campers getting up in the middle of the night and vanishing without a trace. There was even a group of visitors during this time who were staying at Lake Village that reported waking up in the middle of the night to a strange, unearthly voice coming from near their tents. This was just some of what we were experiencing at the time. The voice appeared to be calling them out of their tents and attempting to lure campers deeper into the wilderness. What's most chilling about this is that the voice was different to all the campers we spoke to at the time. Some reported it sounding like a deceased relative, while others described the voice as familiar, but couldn't tell us much more about it. One particular event I remember happened to me and 2 other rangers when we went out during the spring of 1982 in the backcountry. We were going to check on a campsite where we had been having problems before. We were traveling by horseback and came across one of the strange wooden trinkets hanging from a tree out in the middle of nowhere. As we were going through this area, all of us felt something strange, like we were being watched. I thought it was just my imagination until the others began to speak up. When we finally arrived at the campsite, we found one of the missing campers tied up to a tree in the center of the site. He appeared to be alive, but looked like he had been severely beaten, naked, and was in a trance-like state, mumbling something in a foreign language that sounded ancient and had the look of someone who was possessed. We untied him from the tree, but he did not appear to speak English. So we brought him back to Lake Village with us, and after asking around, we found out his name was Kame, and he was from Russia. He told us that he didn't know how he had gotten there or what happened to him. In fact, he had no idea about even coming into Yellowstone. He would later disappear from the area a few days later, and we never saw or heard from him again. I've thought about Kame often over the years and wonder if he was part of this bizarre activity that we were not only seeing but experiencing. What was he doing out in the backcountry of Yellowstone, and what happened to him after that night? He was hardly ever reported missing, so I have no idea what became of him, but I often wonder if we had not found him at that campsite, would he have wound up like some of the other campers who vanished? We obviously have no answer for that, but I would like to think one. One of my co-workers was also attacked by one of his horses, which became possessed as he described and ended up in the hospital after he was thrown from it. He claimed that while he was riding back to Lake Village, the horse's eyes turned black, and it began to head in the opposite direction of where he was trying to get it to go. After fighting with this apparently now possessed animal, he said his hand was jolted really hard and thrown off the horse, where it trampled him. He said that the reins would eventually wrap around him and he was violently thrown onto the ground and then galloped off toward Lake Village at full speed after trampling him. This was the same day he had come into a large clearing and they had found these strange hex symbols, as he described, carved into the ground, almost looking like they were burned. He kept hearing this weird electrical buzzing on and off that reminded him of heavy machinery. Obviously, there was none because they were in the middle of the wilderness, but still incredibly eerie. And now that I look back on all of it, at the time, he actually broke several bones being thrown down and trampled on. But luckily, he survived. He even described how the horse's demeanor instantaneously changed. The horse perished a few days later under mysterious circumstances. These are just a handful of things I can remember off the top of my head after serving there. These events would take place for years to come and intensify going into the later 80s. One of my good friends, who also worked alongside me, had actually dealt with these occult activities face to face. He passed away in 2009 from cancer. God rest his soul. His stories were pretty terrifying. He told me of how he could see entities that were in the form of wolves and cloaked creatures, as he put it, just blazing ghosts-like through the woods at night. He said everything would be illuminated as if there was a full moon out, and while they moved around and disappeared, it would go dark again. He would tell me that the dogs of the pack that he had would begin barking and howling angrily, like they were being commanded by one of these things. And one night, his own dog was trying to run in a different direction than he was following. Later on, he said his dog began looking closely at the tree line, as if watching something intently and starting to act funny. His dog had been around bears and mountain lions, etc., and never acted this way before. I have so many more stories to share with you. As always, I'll be in touch. My name's Jerry. I'm a retired high school biology teacher and have lived in Florida for 17 years now. Ever since retirement, I've dedicated most of my time to my small farm, growing my crops and tending to my small chicken coop. It's a humble, peaceful life, away from the hubbub of the cities, the only noises being the intermittent cries of wildlife from the adjoining woods. The event I'm going to tell you about took place on the 15th of June, 2021. It was a usual evening. The sun had just settled, leaving behind a trail of soft amber on the horizon. After having my supper, I decided to take a quick stroll around the property. The lingering heat from the day had begun to dissipate, replaced by a more agreeable, cool breeze. Walking along the fence line that divided my property from the woods, I noticed that the usual cacophony of cicadas was oddly absent, replaced with a disturbing quietness that hung heavy in the air. It felt as if the woods was holding its breath. I stood there listening, trying to decipher the cause of this unnatural silence. Then I heard it, a rustle from the undergrowth, about 20 yards into the woods. Too large for the usual raccoons or possums that frequented these parts. And there was an unfamiliar grunting sound, low and gruff. In all my years here, I had never heard anything quite like it. Curiosity piqued. I turned on my flashlight and shone it towards the undergrowth. what I saw froze me in place. A pair of eyes reflected the light back at me, but they were different from the ones I had seen before. They were larger, luminescent, with an eerie greenish hue and positioned quite high off the ground. The rustling grew louder as the creature moved, pushing aside the bushes with a brute force. And then it stepped into a patch of moonlight, allowing me a glimpse of its figure. The creature was about 7 feet tall, with a muscular build. Its skin was a mottled gray, appearing rough, almost like the bark of an old tree. Its head was broad, somewhat humanoid, but with sharper features. The most striking were the large, luminescent eyes that dominated its face. There was a raw intelligence in them that sent a chill down my spine. It had a flat, almost non-existent nose and a wide mouth that curled downwards in a grimace, revealing a row of uneven, yellowish teeth. Its arms were long, almost reaching its knees, ending with 4-fingered hands, each finger capped with a thick claw. It stood slightly hunched as if its massive upper body was too heavy to carry. A crest of coarse hair ran from its head down to its back, stopping where a thick tail started, which swayed nervously as it stared back at me. My mind struggled to associate this creature with anything I knew. It seemed as if it had walked straight out of the ancient past, bearing elements from various creatures, yet not fitting any particular species. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it snorted, a huffing sound filled with an uncanny menace. It turned and retreated into the undergrowth, leaving behind a trail of crushed vegetation and a lingering sense of dread. I didn't sleep much that night. For weeks, I looked for any information on what I had seen, checking every wildlife database I could find, reaching out to old colleagues and local wildlife authorities, but to no avail. All I got were skeptical looks and theories about misidentified wildlife. I know what I saw that night wasn't normal, and I've not seen it since. But the memory of that encounter is etched deep in my mind, a testament to the fact that there are still mysteries out there in our world, even in places as familiar as our backyards. It was 1997, and I was working in Yellowstone National Park with the Forest Service. It was my first season there, and I was really excited to be spending the summer in one of the most beautiful places on Earth. I was also very excited to be working in a place that was known for its history of sightings of the supernatural, because as you know, Yellowstone is a hotbed for all things strange and mysterious. As a child, I had always held a deep fascination for stories of ghosts and otherworldly creatures, and at one point or another, I was really hoping I would get to see something paranormal during my time working in Yellowstone. So, one night I was on duty at the ranger station. It was a quiet night, and there wasn't much to do. I was sitting at my desk, going through my paperwork, when I heard a noise just outside. It sounded like something really heavy was moving around in the bushes. Curiosity got to me. I got up to go investigate, and as I approached the bushes, I could hear the noises getting louder and more distinctive. It sounded like either someone or something was breathing very heavily. But this something or someone was so deep in their voice that it sounded like they were a heavy smoker. I began to get scared, and I tried to stay calm to go see what was going on. Suddenly, out of the bushes comes this large, furry thing that was much taller than me. It had a huge head and appeared to have these sharp teeth. I was terrified and I could not move. This thing just stood there and stared at me, and its eyes almost had this dreamlike quality to them, glowing red. Then it slowly began to move towards me. I quickly reacted, pulling up my firearm, and this thing seemed to look down and notice what I had done. It's almost like it realized what I was doing, because it very quickly changed its entire demeanor. It contorted its body in a strange way and almost crouched down and rolled sideways in a fast motion into the thicket beside me. At least, that's the best way I can make out what it did. Then, I hear it running at full speed, crashing through the trees, letting out this horrible scream that I'd never heard before. It was terrible, and this is all that happened in the course of probably 10 seconds. But it felt so much longer. On one end, I was terrified to even breathe, and on the other end, I knew. Who could I possibly tell? So I radioed for backup and told them that I simply had seen a bear and that it had tried to attack me. I was scared, and I couldn't believe what had just happened. I tried to rationalize it and tell myself that it was just a bear, but I knew deep down that it was not. I knew that what I'd seen was something much more evil, something that I could not explain. Even now, I still can't recall exactly how to describe the feelings it gave me. I still think about that night sometimes, and it terrifies me still. I'm not sure what I saw, but I know that it was something supernatural, something that I never want to see again. I actually did my best to forget about that experience for a long time until I befriended a guy I worked with temporarily who claimed to know a lot about Bigfoot. I never entertained the idea, but we began talking one day, and I shared my experience with him in a very vulnerable state and explained in detail what this thing looked like. He's pretty certain I encountered a gugwi. It was hideous looking and enormous. I was sure I was going to be killed. That's when he explained to me that they are known to inhabit the area surrounding Yellowstone and that they are usually very reclusive. He said that they are known to be very aggressive if they feel threatened and will often attack humans and eat them. I was so happy to have survived, but still haunts me to this day. Anyway, as someone who had worked in the forest industry in Yellowstone, I'd had my fair share of encounters with the supernatural anyway, and that one does stand out to me. I've seen other strange things like apparitions and shapes in the dark, but nothing compares to what happened that night. Anyway, let me know if you need anything. Thank you for all the hard work you do. My name is Jim Keller, and I've been a Texas native all my life. I'm a single man in my early 40s, working as a land surveyor, often covering hundreds of miles of terrain a week. The dusty plains, tangled woods, and craggy hills of Texas are as familiar to me as the back of my hand, or so I thought. The encounter I'm about to relate changed everything. It was mid-April a few years back, just before the sunset, when the Texan sky becomes a canvas of oranges and purples. I was up in the Panhandle region near Amarillo, surveying a large parcel of land recently purchased by a wealthy developer. It was a solitary job, and I loved it. I cherished silence and the bond I formed with the wilderness over time. But that evening, the tranquility I cherished was interrupted. The day had been unremarkably hot, and the setting sun was a welcome sight. I was packing up my equipment into the back of my truck when I noticed something out of place. About half a mile out, there was a small grouping of trees, and there was movement. From this distance, it could have been anything, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my binoculars from the truck's cab. I peered through, adjusting the focus. It was larger than any animal I'd seen in this region, hunched over and dark against the dusky skyline. It was covered in a dense, dark fur or perhaps feathers, its body oddly elongated with disproportionate limbs. It was like a tall, misshapen man with an animal's gait. Its legs seemed powerful, bent in an unnatural way, and it had long arms that ended in what appeared to be claw-like appendages. I couldn't make out its face clearly, but there was a distinct glow, maybe eyes reflecting the dying light. I felt a chill prickle along the back of my neck. It was unsettling. For a long while, I just watched it, my curiosity wrestling with the primal unease growing within me. Then it seemed to freeze. I could have sworn it turned its head, looking straight at me. I was at least half a mile away, but in that moment, I felt seen, observed. I faced rattlesnakes, wild boars, even a mountain lion once, but nothing came close to the dread I felt then. I packed my binoculars, jumped into my truck, and sped out of there. The dirt road seemed to stretch forever, and in the rearview mirror, the dark silhouette of the trees grew smaller. That night, I barely slept. The image of that creature haunted my dreams. I wanted to talk about it, but who'd believe me? I'd be a crazy land surveyor, spotting monsters. I kept quiet, but the silence was a heavy burden. I started avoiding that part of the Panhandle. The thought of running into the creature again, it left my guts churning. I dove into work, using it as a distraction, but the encounter had altered my perception. The The wilderness didn't feel the same. It was no longer familiar. There was a mystery, an unknown lurking within it. After the encounter, I found myself reaching out to others more, seeking comfort in human company. I joined local gatherings, volunteered at the community center, and spent more time with friends. The loneliness of my job, once a cherished trait, now a reminder of that creature. As days turned into weeks, the memory of the encounter started to lose its sharp edges. But the world it revealed, one filled with undiscovered mysteries, stayed with me. Texas was no longer just my home. Every tree, every shadow hinted at stories waiting to be uncovered. My job as a land surveyor took on a new meaning. I was no longer merely documenting the land. I was exploring it, searching for what lies hidden in its heart. Sometimes when I find myself alone in the wild, a shiver of fear trickles down my spine, and I'm reminded of the creature. But with the fear comes a sense of wonder, a realization that we share our world with creatures unknown, living their lives parallel to ours, hidden in plain sight. My name's Jake. For as long as I can remember, I've been in love with the untamed natural beauty of Wyoming, where I've lived my entire life. I work as a forest ranger at Yellowstone National Park, a job I've held since I was 21, right after finishing college. My duties involve patrolling the park, ensuring wildlife and visitors alike follow the rules so that everyone can enjoy the pristine wilderness in harmony. This incident happened in the summer of 2018 during one of my routine patrols through the vast expanse of the park. The day had started off as any other. The sun was slowly making its way across the clear blue sky, and I was patrolling the southern edge of Yellowstone, an area teeming with dense forests and clear, bubbling brooks. As I moved deeper into the forest, away from the populated paths, I noticed an unusual stillness. There were no birds chirping, no sounds of squirrels or other small creatures rustling in the underbrush. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath. Then I saw it. Near the edge of a clearing, partially obscured by the thick foliage, was a creature unlike anything I've ever seen. At first glance, it looked somewhat like a bear, albeit larger and standing much taller on its hind legs, approximately 9 feet. However, its anatomy was quite different. Its body was covered in shaggy, dark brown fur, and it had a hunchback, making it appear as though it was perpetually leaning forward. Its arms were significantly longer than that of any bear I'd ever seen, ending in large, hand-like appendages tipped with formidable-looking claws. But the most striking feature was its head. It was elongated, almost reminiscent of a wolf, with bright, intelligent amber eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through the trees. Its mouth was full of sharp teeth, but its facial expression didn't seem aggressive. Rather, it appeared as curious as I was. Our eyes locked, and I felt a primal fear that had nothing to do with logic. I was frozen in place, my breath hitching in my throat. We held each other's gaze for what felt like an eternity. Then, as swiftly and quietly as it appeared, the creature turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving behind nothing but the rustle of leaves and my racing heart. In the following days, I found myself unable to shake the encounter from my mind. I kept replaying the moment over and over, trying to make sense of what I had seen. I consulted field guides, combed through cryptozoology websites, and even reached out to colleagues, discreetly of course, but found no animal that matched the creature's description. It was as if I'd seen a myth come to life. The strangest part was I didn't feel any terror after the encounter. The initial fear had been replaced by a profound sense of wonder. I'd had a brush with something utterly unknown, something that wasn't supposed to exist, and yet it did, at least for that brief moment in the quiet of the forest. It left me with a feeling of awe and respect for the wilderness, reminding me that nature still held mysteries beyond our comprehension. Since then, I've tried to find the creature again on my patrols, careful to respect its space, treating it with the same caution I would any wild animal. I haven't seen it again, but sometimes, in the quiet stillness of the forest, I sense it, Perhaps it's merely my imagination, fueled by the desire for another encounter, but it provides me with a newfound appreciation for my job and the vast expanse of the wild that I patrol. I still don't know what I saw that day, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that I've had a unique experience that's changed the way I see the wilderness. It's a reminder that there are still things out there we don't understand, and for me, that's part of the magic of living out here in Wyoming, under the wide open sky. A little bit about myself to set the stage. My name is Alex Turner, a 45-year-old landscape photographer living in Missoula, Montana. For me, camping is more than a hobby. It's a passion. I've spent countless nights under the stars, exploring trails, and capturing the raw, natural beauty of our world. I don't do this for a living. My day job is a mechanical engineer, but the call of the wild has always been more appealing to me. I venture out every chance I get. I've encountered various animals, bears, coyotes, and once a very grumpy porcupine, but nothing had prepared me for what happened on a warm summer night in 2017. It was the 21st of June, and the Rocky Mountains called to me. Packing my gear and camera, I decided to spend a week in the heart of the wilderness, camping out in a secluded spot I'd been visiting since my late teens. I drove to my chosen site, near a serene lake surrounded by towering pine trees. On my third night, things took an unexpected turn. The night was clear, stars dusted the night sky like sprinkles on black velvet, and a cool breeze rustled the surrounding pines. I'd set up camp near the lake's edge, a little fire pit illuminating the surrounding area. Dinner was simple, beans straight from the can, and I was lying in my tent, listening to the soothing sounds of the night. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A soft splash. Not like a fish jumping, but something larger breaking the surface. Armed with my flashlight, I carefully unzipped the tent. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The forest had stopped. No crickets, no owls, just stifling, heavy silence. The light from my flashlight fell onto the lake. The water rippled gently. In the heart of the lake, a figure moved. It was tall, around 7 feet, partially submerged in the water. Its body was lean, muscular, and covered in short, dark fur, slick and glistening in the moonlight. Its head was elongated, with sharp, pointed ears. The creature had 2 radiant yellow eyes that reflected an eerie glow in the flashlight beam. Its arms were long and powerful, ending in clawed hands that were paddling through the water. I held my breath, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The creature, unaware or perhaps unfazed by my presence, glided across the lake with a quiet grace. A low rumble, like a distant thunder, echoed across the lake. I realized it was coming from the creature. Not a growl, but something akin to a purr, a soft, contented sound. It moved until it reached the other side of the lake, disappearing into the tree line. I remained motionless long after it was gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly retreated into my tent. The sounds of the forest tentatively resumed, filling the air with familiar nocturnal songs. Sleep evaded me for the rest of the night. At dawn, I approached the edge of the lake. There were large, clawed footprints etched into the muddy bank where the creature had emerged. I took pictures, evidence that it hadn't been some sleep-deprived hallucination. I felt a profound sense of wonder and fear. I had witnessed something extraordinary and terrifying, something that had shattered my understanding of what was possible in this world. The creature was a part of nature, yet unlike anything I'd ever known. Instead of leaving as any sane person might, I stayed. I spent the rest of the week at the campsite hoping for another glimpse, another encounter. It never came. The nights were peaceful and quiet, and the creature in the lake remained unseen. When I finally made my way back to civilization, I was different. The world was different. I felt a strange connection to that place, to the creature. I didn't share my story, not at first. I feared ridicule or disbelief, but over time, I realized the importance of sharing what I'd witnessed, of telling the world that there are still mysteries in our world, undiscovered and unexplained. The encounter shifted something within me. I looked at the wilderness with new eyes, a sense of humbleness replacing the familiarity I once felt. Each rustle in the trees, each ripple in the water was a reminder of the unknown, a testament to the wild, untamed beauty of the world. The creature in the lake became my obsession, an enigma I yearned to unravel, to understand. But above all, I respected space, its secrecy. The creature, whatever it was, had its own world, its own rules. I was just a visitor. I carried the memory of that night with me on every trip, a permanent fixture in my adventures. Every once in a while, I returned to the same spot by the lake. I've never seen the creature again, but its presence lingers. I feel it in the silence of the night, in the mystery of the dark waters. I feel it in the echoes of that distant rumble, forever imprinted in my mind. It's a reminder, a testament to the unknown, the unexplored, and the undiscovered in this world. My name is Rebecca Stone. I am a 35-year-old software engineer from Oregon, and I have spent most of my life tucked behind computer screens, living a comfortable life amidst lines of code and complex algorithms. Being an introvert, I was content with my quiet life until the untimely death of my mother. In late 2017, she passed away, and I became the unexpected inheritor of a rustic, old family house nestled in upstate New York. After my mother's funeral, the loneliness in my Oregon apartment felt unbearable, and I decided to move into this inherited house in hopes of some solace and change. So, in early spring 2018, I found myself traversing across states to make my new start in a house at the edge of the small town of Windham, New York. The house, set deep within the Catskill Mountains, was beautiful in a time-worn way, a two-storied structure with gray wooden paneling and moss-covered shingles, surrounded by the ceaseless serenity of nature. Yet, the transition wasn't smooth. The stillness of the town, the remoteness of the house, all felt eerily alien to me. I wondered if I had made a mistake. One evening, around a month after moving, something strange happened. It was May 18, 2018, a night that would etch into my memory for years to come. The evening was humid, carrying the scent of an approaching storm. I was in the study reading when I heard a peculiar rustling sound from outside, followed by a series of low, guttural grunts. Assuming it was perhaps a stray animal, I went to the kitchen window, which overlooked the backyard. The moment I parted the curtains, my heart lurched. There, in the garden, partially hidden by the old apple tree, was a creature I had never seen before. It was bipedal, standing at around 7 feet, its body lean and covered in a dark, shiny fur that flickered under the dim porch light. It had long, muscular arms which hung eerily by its side, its hands sporting claws that glinted ominously. Its head was elongated and somewhat canine with a pronounced snout, but its eyes were the most chilling part, glowing a bright, disturbing amber. I stood frozen at the window, staring at this unexplainable creature. It moved slowly, its movements eerily human-like, sniffing the air occasionally as it scavenged through my garden. The sight was petrifying, but there was a strange allure to it too, a wild, untamed elegance that held me captive. After what felt like an eternity, the creature retreated into the woods, leaving behind an unsettling silence. The reality of what I had seen began to sink in, and my knees buckled. I sat on the kitchen floor, trying to comprehend what just happened. The next few days were filled with fear and fascination. I kept myself locked indoors, too terrified to venture out after sundown. I started reading up on local folklore and wildlife, trying to identify what I had seen, but nothing seemed to fit. Even my attempts to casually discuss strange animals with locals only garnered strange looks or dismissive laughs. The feeling of isolation became oppressive, the once beautiful mountains now a looming threat. I considered moving out, but where would I go? This house, this town, was my last connection to my mother. Instead, I opted for getting a large dog, a gentle yet protective German Shepherd. I named Max for company and protection. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the fear gradually began to subside. I didn't see the creature again. However, every rustle in the woods, every unidentifiable sound at night still sends a shiver down my spine. While the encounter was petrifying, it also ignited a peculiar sense of intrigue within me. The software engineer from Oregon, who once found solace in her structured, predictable world, now finds herself studying about cryptids, local folklore, and unknown creatures in her free time. And so, I continue to live in the house my mother left me, amidst the serene but haunting woods of Windham. I keep my doors locked and Macs closed, the memory of that April night never too far from my thoughts. It's an odd existence, marked by a mix of dread and fascination, and an undercurrent of respect for the wild, untamed mysteries that lurk just beyond our understanding. For the last 10 years, I've seen countless grizzly and black bears, wolves, bison, mountain lions, elk, and other wildlife in my career at Yellowstone. Just this week, I had the chance to see 2 different grizzlies up close, about 30 feet away. This occurred while hiking a trail with some friends of mine who also work here, either as rangers or interpretive staff. Interpretive staff are essentially tour guides. Both encounters occurred within Hayden Valley, but that's not necessarily important right now because what happened to me on Friday night was much more chilling than any bear sighting could ever be. I decided to stay late on Friday to clean up my patrol truck before it got too late to go into Canyon Village. This is where I work my patrol shifts. There's just this one spot along Dunraven Pass Road, which is located north of Canyon Village, where strange occurrences happen. For example, I was out with my partner when we came across what appeared to be a mutilated deer carcass. There were weird symbols carved into the ground around it, and the deer's body had been cut open in a strange way. We reported it to our supervisor, who told us to keep an eye out for anything suspicious. After all, this was clearly the work of a person. A few weeks later, we were on patrol near the same spot on the pass and saw a group of about 20 people acting suspiciously. They had these weird glow stick things that they were hanging around their necks, arms, and legs. They looked like some sort of cult or something. We decided to park our truck down the road from them, off in the woods, where we could see them, but they could not see where we were. We were trying to keep ourselves out of view. We watched for about 20 minutes what I can only describe as a ceremony that took place right outside of Canyon Village. There was chanting going on, and they were carving these bizarre symbols with chalk on the ground. All these people just stand around doing strange things. I've never seen anything like this before or since until last night, in September of 2014. This is why I'm telling my story now, because what happened then scared me more than a grizzly bear ever could. So Friday night after work, around 9, I go back out there on Dunraven Pass Road where we initially found the mutilated deer carcass. This time there was another one. It was a bison. It appeared to have been decapitated, and the organs and meat had been ripped away from the body, and there were more symbols carved into the ground. We reported that to our supervisor, and they told us to increase our patrols in that area, but that didn't seem to stop anything. Things only would get stranger because a few days later, while on patrol near Roosevelt Tower, we found an abandoned vehicle. It was a van that had been spray painted with all sorts of symbols, and there was also a dead deer inside of it. The van had been completely gutted, and inside was a dead deer with its body cut open and gutted. We called our supervisor, and they told us to confiscate it and go back to the village. So we did that, and they told us to spend the rest of our shift patrolling in different areas of the park. I'm not going to say where, because I don't want people out camping looking for these things. But the next night, I was back on patrol near Canyon Village. Now this time, something strange happened. It was now around 10 p.m., and this group of about 5 or 6 people came walking up from behind me carrying those same strange glow sticks around their necks and arms and legs. I watched as they gathered together along one of the roadsides, right along one of the pull-offs. They were all standing over by this one spot, about 30 feet away from where I was parked. I had no idea if they could see me, but they did not seem to care. I watched as all 5 or 6 of them took turns peering into the small hole in the ground, as if they were trying to either put something in it or pull something out of it. Then, all of a sudden, they all acted completely spooked and took off sprinting into the woods. Listen, I understand that the stories I'm telling you is strange. It just seems like there's some kind of crazy cult that is targeting animals purposefully, and I'm scared they might come after people next. On the 17th of July, 2015, my brother Max and I decided to embark on a week-long backpacking trip through the heart of Yosemite National Park. Nestled within California's Sierra Nevada mountains, Yosemite was a place Max and I cherished since childhood. Its awe-inspiring vistas, alpine wilderness, and lush valleys formed a landscape we knew well, but on this occasion, something was different. A bit about myself. My name is Evan, and at the time of our journey, I was 27 and an amateur wildlife photographer working for a local advertising firm in San Francisco. My brother, 2 years my junior, was an outdoor educator for a non-profit organization, taking underprivileged kids on wilderness excursions. We were both avid outdoorsmen and felt at ease in nature, or so we thought. We started our hike from Tuolumne Meadows, intending to trek the northern section of the park, then loop back. The first few days were just as we expected, stunningly beautiful and equally exhausting. We set up camp near a stream on the 3rd night, planning to rest for a day before continuing our journey. That night, we encountered something. It was late, probably around 2 in the morning, when I was awakened by a noise outside our tent. It wasn't a common animal sound, but rather something indescribable. It was guttural, low, and echoed through the valley in an almost melodic way. Max woke up too, both of us listening in the deafening silence that followed. With hesitant curiosity, I unzipped the tent and peered out into the moonlit wilderness. At first, I saw nothing but the familiar sight of the forest. Then, about 50 feet away, down by the stream, I spotted it. The creature stood on all 4s, but unlike any quadruped I'd seen. Its body was slender, elongated, perhaps around 5 feet long from snout to the base of its tail. Its fur was dark, matted, and hung in long tangles from its lithe frame. The tail was thick and muscular, almost reptilian in shape. Its head, however, was what struck me the most. It was small compared to the body, with oversized, luminous, almond-shaped eyes that reflected the moonlight. The creature was drinking water from the stream, and as I watched, it lifted its head. Its movement was slow and deliberate, almost graceful. The eyes scanned the surroundings before resting on our tent. It didn't startle. Instead, it held my gaze with an intelligent, almost calm demeanor. We watched each other, the creature and I, in mutual, silent curiosity. In my dazed fascination, I hadn't noticed Max beside me until he let out a soft gasp. The creature then flickered its eyes, and in that split second, I felt a rush of fear. But rather than attack, the creature backed away, took one last look at us, and retreated into the darkness. After the encounter, Max and I were essentially speechless, and we didn't sleep that night. Instead, we kept a vigilant watch, half expecting the creature to return, but it didn't. The next day, we spent hours discussing what we'd seen, trying to match the creature to anything we knew. We couldn't. We even scoured the area for tracks, but found nothing. Our remaining days in Yosemite were shadowed by that experience, and despite the park's beauty, we felt an unease we'd never felt before. Once back in civilization, we researched more and reached out to local naturalists, sharing our encounter in careful detail. The general consensus was that we had seen an unknown creature. It was exciting but equally unsettling, challenging our understanding of the familiar wilderness. Today, 8 years later, the memory of that creature is as vivid as ever. The event changed my perspective on nature, reminding me of its many undiscovered facets. Max and I have returned to Yosemite multiple times since, but we've never encountered the creature again. Interestingly, despite the lingering unease, the experience has driven me towards wildlife conservation efforts. My photography has shifted to emphasize the importance of preserving habitats for all creatures, both known and unknown. We still share our story as much as we can, not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the mysteries nature continues to hold. We hope to make others as receptive to it as we have become. I've enjoyed hunting throughout the various forests located in Pennsylvania. I don't have a particular favorite. I enjoy all of them. There are many of us around here who enjoy a good bow hunt, and I am no exception. The forest in question is higher elevated, full of white pine and oak trees all throughout, with thicker flowers and brush. This was back in 2003, and I have had several friends who've been hunting in and around this area for years now. I've heard warnings that because of the large population of deer, there's supposedly a high amount of Bigfoot activity in certain areas. I was a Bigfoot believer before this happened to me, but I had no idea these wolf creatures existed. I didn't even think it was a possibility. And I've gone hunting in this forest for a few years prior to this event and never had anything strange occur. So I was confident and ready to get myself a nice trophy buck this year. I got up in the wee early hours before sunrise, made it out there with my bow. I remember the air being crisp and cool. The onset of fall was really setting in this particular year. I remember walking quite a way and making it to one of the stands that I had set up in the area. This particular stand I had perched quite high up on the tree, more so than normal. I climbed up, climbed in, and pulled out my coffee flask and sat and waited. I don't know at what point I noticed the silence, but I became aware that after some time, the noise in the woods died. You could hear a pin drop from a mile away. It felt eerie. I've been doing this for a while, and I've never had my skin crawl like it did in that moment. From what I would estimate to be about 300 plus yards away in the woods, there was a bunch of whimpering and howling. This was loud. It sounded distorted, not like you would expect if you heard a coyote or a wolf, both of which I've heard, and it didn't quite match the sounds. I was curious, and so I kept looking around, looking for any movement or anything possible that I could see. Still nothing. The whimpering and howling stopped, and I began to hear movement in the brush from a little way away, coming in my direction. Light now was just starting to break, and I could start to make out the minimal details around me. Things were still dead silent other than this movement that began sounding closer and closer. It sounded heavy, and I wasn't sure if it was a deer coming my way or what, but I could make out that there were multiple of whatever animals were approaching my direction. I heard branches breaking to my left, and out steps these three beings. Beings is what I'll call them because they certainly were not animals, and they were not humans. These three things walked in unison together, very coordinated, very organized, very tall. If I had to guess, well over 6 feet. Their fur was charcoal black and looked to be like they absorbed the light in the area. Their eyes, though, all of them had this horrible yellow glow to them as they slowly hunched over and walked slowly, taking their time with each stride. I tried to stay quiet and not make a sound as I went into full-on panic mode. These monsters, whatever they were, gave off an incredibly evil vibe. If they wanted to climb up into my stand and devour me alive, they could have easily. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Every step these things took, you could feel it in the ground below. I could tell these creatures weighed a great deal. That didn't surprise me with how much mass they carried around and how tall they were, and their stature. One of them stopped only a few feet away from me, right by my stand. This thing started lifting its head up and sniffing the air. It sounded loud, like a bear sniffing right outside somebody's tent. In that moment, I lost it, urinating all over myself. I was so scared. I'm watching this transpire all before my eyes. I'm very fortunate that my deer stand was up quite a way because had it been lower, it could have just reached right up and pulled me out. Now, this thing sniffed the air for a moment and did some sort of weird thing with its mouth. I can't even begin to describe the noise. It was like a clicking noise mixed with a guttural sigh. I don't know how to portray it accurately. It was communicating, though, with the other two. The others stopped and looked up in my direction, and I felt in that moment that I was ready to have a heart attack. I don't think these things saw me, but they looked right up at my stand. One of those things must have signaled for the other two that there was a person up in that stand, and I tightly gripped my combat knife like it was my life. I usually keep it strapped to my thigh. I was just praying my death would be swift and painless, knowing there was no way I'd be able to fight off 3 of these things. But they just stood there, all of them making this clicking, shattering, guttural noise, and then continued on westward. Once they were out of sight, I began crying. I was petrified. I had a hard time even convincing myself to move my body, and I needed to leave now before those things got back. If I was caught on foot, I was surely a dead man, and I was not going to have that. I managed to work my body enough to climb down my stand, and I ran quickly back to where I was originally. I should have probably given a little more clarity on what I saw and how exactly long that lasted because of the early morning hours. With the sun barely breaking through, light conditions were poor at best. So, a lot of what I saw was massive shapes and silhouettes and those darn glowing yellow eyes. The shape was like a massive body with a dog-like head and pointed ears on top. It reminded me of a German shepherd, actually. Same with the face. I could make out a very visible snout with more specific details that were hard to point out. I watched the entire thing play out in front of me, and I think it stuck its snout up in the air because it had possibly smelled me and was trying to communicate to the others that I was there. Their chattering almost reminded me of them arguing amongst themselves, unsure of what to do next. But again, it was very brief. They kept the same pace and stride all the way to where they were no longer visible. The entire occurrence probably only lasted 3 to 5 minutes at most, but in those moments, it was endless. It felt as if time itself had come to an utter stop. I didn't think I was going to make it out of there alive, and that experience alone really ruined the outdoors and hunting for me for quite a while. I'm sharing this because it has been bugging me for years. The memory of that day still feels like a bad dream, and it happened back when I was in high school during the summer of 2024 in a small town in West Virginia. I'm not sure if anyone will believe me, but here goes. I lived in a house that was surrounded by forest. My friend, Matt, and I often hiked on the trails that led through the woods exploring the hidden parts of the forest. That summer day was no different than any other. We set off early in the morning carrying our backpacks filled with food, water, and other essentials. An hour passed as we pushed through the wildly overgrown and dense undergrowth. As we ventured deeper, we began to notice something strange. It was too quiet. The usual sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves were absent. Even the wind seemed to have ceased. The silence was disconcerting, but we decided to press on. Suddenly, Matt pointed at something up ahead. Through the thick foliage, we could make out a structure. It looked like an old mining shack, its wood decaying, half swallowed by the forest. Curiosity piqued. We approached the dilapidated shack. Inside, it was dark and smelled of damp earth. We used our phones as flashlights, and that's when we saw it. On the far wall of the shack, there was a large mural. It was a painting of what appeared to be a creature with human-like features, but with scaly skin and lizard-like eyes. The painting was incredibly detailed and looked, well, ancient. We stood there staring at the eerie mural, our hearts pounding. We weren't sure what it was or who had painted it, but it gave us an uneasy feeling, for sure. It even bothered us so much that we knew we had to leave. The silence of the forest, the decaying shack, and now this mural, it was all just too much. So, we turned and reversed our steps out of the shack and away from the area. However, we couldn't shake off the sense of being watched. I kept thinking that it felt like the eyes from the mural were following us. We moved briskly on the trail, feeling an inexplicable sense of urgency. The sun was beginning to set, and the woods were casting long, creepy shadows. Suddenly, Matt, who was a few steps ahead of me, froze. I was about to ask him what was wrong when he motioned for me to be quiet, pointing ahead. About 10 yards away from us, partially hidden by the undergrowth, was something that looked like a figure. It was tall, nearly 6 feet, with a muscular build. Its skin had a greenish tinge and looked scaly under the dim sunlight. We could see the back of its head, which was elongated and had a rough, bumpy texture. My heart pounded in my chest as a wave of fear washed over me. It was an actual creature, just like the one in the mural. We sat there, wide-eyed, watching this creature that wasn't supposed to exist. Suddenly, it turned. Its eyes were a striking yellow, with vertical slits for pupils. It glanced around before its gaze fell on us. That was the push we needed. We bolted, tearing through the underbrush, not caring about the branches whipping our faces or the rocks under our feet. We didn't stop running until we were out of the woods and back at our homes. We were panting heavily, our clothes torn and faces scratched. But we were safe, and that was all that mattered. For the next few days, we kept our encounter to ourselves, too shocked to talk about it, too scared to admit it was real. But the fear and curiosity lingered. We had seen something unimaginable and had to find answers. We turned to the internet, digging up anything we could find about strange reptilian creatures. We found old articles and forum posts talking about sightings of reptilian humanoids around the world. We discovered that there were legends and folklore about such beings going back centuries. With this newfound knowledge that basically helped us to know we weren't crazy, we decided to tell our parents. They didn't believe us, of course. They thought we both had an overactive imagination, or maybe we saw a wild animal and panicked. We knew better, but there was nothing we could do to convince them. Bottom line is, that summer changed our lives. We grew more cautious, rarely venturing into the woods, and never again did either of us go alone. We continued researching, trying to find more about what we had encountered. Years have passed since then, but the memory of that day is as clear as ever. I don't know if we will ever get answers, but one thing is for sure. There are things in this world that we don't understand, and sometimes it's better not to disturb them. I've had a strange experience that I've been hesitant to share, mostly because it's difficult to articulate, and I worry about how it might be perceived. But after sitting on it for years, I think it's finally time. This occurred in 2014 during my time as a fisherman in the small coastal town of Plymouth, Massachusetts. Our town is filled with typical coastal charm, with its beachfront houses and seafood restaurants. I used to go out fishing every day on my modest boat, often staying out on the waters until late. It was a simple, monotonous life, but one that I loved dearly. One night, during the latter half of the summer, something extraordinary happened. It was an unusually calm night. The sky was clear, and the moon was particularly bright. I was in my boat, a few miles offshore, waiting for the nets to fill up. Suddenly, I noticed an unusual light in the distance. It wasn't a shit light. It was too bright and too high above the horizon. The light was pulsating and changing colors, from a radiant white to a deep blue, then to a fiery red. Without thinking, I steered my boat toward the light, curiosity piquing. As I closed in on the light source, the darkness around me was being replaced by an eerie, otherworldly glow. The source of the light was a large, disc-shaped object, hovering silently above the water's surface. It was a substantial structure, probably around 30 feet in diameter, its metallic body reflecting the moonlight, giving it an ethereal shine. The edges of the disc were lined with radiant lights that pulsated rhythmically, transitioning between different colors in an entrancing pattern. It would start as a brilliant, white, pure, and intense. Then the light would gently morph into a rich blue, deep as the ocean beneath me. Suddenly it would change to a fiery red, a hue so profound it looked like the sky was on fire. There were no sharp edges, no corners, just this perfectly symmetrical, saucer-like structure. The top of the object seemed to have a dome, the details of which were difficult to discern due to the intensity of the lights. The surface of the disc was smooth and featureless, devoid of any seams, rivets, or signs of construction. It looked like a singular, cohesive unit, a characteristic far removed from any human-made object I had ever seen. The object moved with an unsettling precision. It hovered in place, not fluctuating or wavering, displaying a control of aerodynamics that seemed beyond human capabilities. The stillness of the disk was uncanny and added to the surrealness of the entire situation. Suddenly, the lights around the edges started to pulsate more rapidly. Then, in a split second, the object descended. It was as if gravity had no hold over it. It soared at an astonishing speed, covering the vast expanse of the sky in mere seconds before disappearing, leaving no trace of its presence behind. The sky returned to its usual dark self, and the water around my boat settled back into its routine, lapping against the hull. Once I was back on the shore, I told a few of my close friends about the incident. I wasn't surprised when they reacted with skepticism. They suggested that it might have been a drone or an experimental military aircraft, but I know what I saw was far beyond our technology. For the following weeks, I combed the internet for similar experiences. I found communities of people sharing their UFO sightings and encounters, providing some comfort that I wasn't alone. It didn't give me a definitive answer, but it helped me realize that there are many aspects of our universe that remain unexplored and unidentified. I still go out fishing every night, and I still look up at the sky wondering if I'll see that light again. That encounter didn't deter me. Instead, it sparked a fascination in me, a curiosity about the world beyond our own. Maybe one day, we will find out what's out there. Until then, all we have are our experiences, no matter how unbelievable they may be. I bought my first house a little over a year ago. I'd been living in apartments for years, basically my entire adult life, so I was really looking forward to having a house with a yard and being able to garden and have campfires. I live in a medium-sized city in Virginia, not far from the Blue Ridge Mountains, so I have the usual urban advantages, but I'm not far from nature either. The house I bought was in a smaller suburb on the edge of the city, and my house backed up against a small forest and a creek. Not far away was a much larger forested area. I had a good-sized yard, partly fenced in, with lots of privacy, and one of my first goals was to get the backyard set up. I wanted to host a cookout for my friends as soon as I could. Within weeks of moving in, I started working on the yard. I took care of mowing and weed whacking and then did some simple gardening, nothing fancy. I bought an umbrella table and some chairs, and also a few camping chairs for the fire. And then I got to work digging a fire pit. Once it was in decent shape, I invited friends and coworkers over for a cookout. We roasted hot dogs over the fire, had some drinks, and hung out all night. It was exactly what I hoped for. I cleaned up the food after everyone went home, but left everything else out until morning. The next day, I went out to finish cleaning up and was stunned. My backyard was in ruins. The table and chairs had been flipped over and tossed around. There was garbage all over the yard, shredded up. And there were deep furrows in the grass, and the little flower beds I'd planted were trampled. I took pictures and then started cleaning up. I was able to save the furniture, although it was pretty banged up. There wasn't much I could do about the track marks in the grass, though. I sent the pictures to my parents and some friends, asking them what might have caused this type of damage. Based on the chewed-up garbage, I assumed raccoons, but the flipped furniture was definitely the work of something larger. And with the long scratch marks in the ground had to be made by something with big claws. As far as I knew, we didn't have bears out here or wolves. Coyotes were my best guess, although it seemed like really odd behavior. No one I asked had any better answer either. I was assuming that the smell of the food was what had attracted the animals, so I didn't have another cookout for a while. Instead, I worked on fixing up the fence. A little over half of it was already fenced in, so I got someone to install the additional sections to finish it up. The contractor also shored up the older sections and made sure all of it was sturdy enough to keep animals out. A few months after the first cookout, I was feeling better and decided to invite friends over again. Just like before, we made hot dogs and hamburgers and sat around the fire, listening to music. Between 11 and midnight, most of my guests filtered out. One friend stayed behind to help me clean up. He knew about the mess last time and was concerned, which was nice. We pulled all the food and drinks and garbage inside. I folded up the camping chairs and cleaned everything up as best as I could. I felt a lot better with the fence, but I was still being cautious. Once it was all done, my friend left. I made sure the backyard light was on and locked up. I tried to go to bed, but I was having a hard time falling asleep. Since I lived alone, it was a little freaky thinking of a pack of coyotes or whatever animal prowling around my house. I knew I was safe inside, but I still felt nervous. After an hour or so, I was almost asleep when I heard the sounds. It was a splintering sound, like cracking wood. It was enough to completely wake me up. My bedroom window looked out over the backyard, so I walked over and looked out. The light was still on, but everything beyond it was in the dark. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary and wasn't sure where the noise had come from. I stayed there, watching and waiting. Eventually, I saw movement. Right at the edge of the light, something dark was moving around, checking out the backyard. It was big, but I couldn't see much more than that. I was too scared to go downstairs for a better look, but was confused as to how it had gotten in the yard. Apparently, it could climb fences. The thing moved around some more. It sniffed around the fire pit and then moved closer to the table. As it did, I could see it more clearly. It had thick, dark fur, and I was starting to think I had been wrong, not a coyote or raccoon. This was big, like a bear. I was looking down on it, and the thing was hunched oddly, so I couldn't see all of its body very well. Then, as I watched, it stood. It straightened up and stood tall on two legs. And when it turned its head, I could see that it had a long and narrow snout. The head of this thing was shaped much more like a dog than a bear. Also, now that it was standing up, I could see that the legs were too long and the torso too slender to be a bear. I had no idea what I was looking at. Suddenly, it turned and lifted its head to look right at me. I was standing in a dark room. It couldn't possibly see me, but it stared straight at me for several long minutes, its gold eyes glowing in the darkness. I felt hypnotized looking back at it until I snapped out of its stare and jumped back from the window. I threw myself into bed and hid under the covers all night, not sleeping. The next morning, I went outside to check everything out and saw that part of my fence had been knocked over. Apparently, the dogman creature had somehow pulled it down to get in my yard. Needless to say, I stopped having cookouts after that. I'm writing to you because my wife's hobby almost got me killed. That sounds a little dramatic, I know. It would make sense if she had a crazy hobby like skydiving or base jumping. Honestly, I think that might have been a little better for my ego too if the news article was titled "Local Man Plunges to His Death as Chute Fails." That sounds better than "Local Man Dies While Antiquing." Ego aside though, that's exactly what almost happened. For the record, I'm a retired cop. I spent 20 years on the Lexington Police Force and 5 years before that on the New Orleans Police Department in New Orleans. I guess you can say I had my fair share of excitement, especially when I was still in Louisiana. A couple of times I thought I might not be going home with all my teeth or other body parts intact, but I always made it back alive. I thought I'd left all the crazy behind after I turned in my badge, but since I'm writing this letter to you, it's obvious I was wrong. I guess I should tell you how this all happened. My wife and I had sold our place in Lexington once my retirement came through. We took over my parents' farm. It's a sweet little 13-acre hobby farm in Versailles, rolling green Kentucky land with some trees around the perimeter. It was enough to run some cattle and goats, maybe some horses. I spent my time working with the cows and building our herd of dairy goats, and our Australian Kelpie dogs were happy to have something that they could herd. Sure, it was hard work, but it beat getting shot at. While I was outside, my wife was taking over the inside. She started finding all these old things when she went up into the attic. Now, I'm not an authority on old stuff, but my wife is, and she got really excited about what she found. She started looking into antique stores to see if she could fill the holes in the china collection and all that. That meant she went to antique stores too. That's not my scene, and I used the farm needs me more often than I probably should. About 6 months into my retirement, my darling wife let me know that she'd actually seen me more before I retired, and that she'd really like to spend time with me. Busted. Turns out that antiquing is fun, and I enjoyed it. I mostly trailed along behind my wife as she oohed and ah-hed over stuff older than the both of us, but I wasn't required to do much talking, and antique stores have a lot of stuff that aren't china. It wasn't too bad, until it was. If you're not a Kentuckian, you won't know this, but our beautiful state has some of the best antique hunting in the South. Hazel is where you want to go. It's a beautiful little town, and if antiquing was an Olympic sport, Hazel would be where you go to win gold. I didn't think much of the day we went. It was a pretty day, a little warm for spring but too cool for summer. My wife dragged me all over every antique store in the city. Seemed like we found some vintage bridles, which I liked, and some furniture that looked like my grandmother had. Perfect. But then my wife found something else. It was a doll. Nothing earth-shattering. In fact, it wasn't a porcelain doll at all. It was an old Raggedy Ann. It was in really good condition, which is impressive for a rag doll, and my wife loved her. She'd had one when she was a little girl, and it had gotten lost or chewed on by the dog by the time she was in middle school. Seeing how starry-eyed she was over it, of course I said yes to getting it. It wasn't like it was going to break the bank, and I figured she'd put it on the mantle or in one of our antique rocking chairs and be done with it. Maybe our little granddaughter would like to play with it when she came over. God, I wish I'd told her to leave that thing where she found it. Things started to go weird as soon as we got that doll home. Our dogs wouldn't go near it. In fact, they'd back away whining. I figured it had a weird smell on it and left it on the bed in the guest room, propped up on the pillows. But the next time I went in to open the windows, it wasn't on the pillows. It was halfway down the bed. I just figured that my wife had dropped it, or the dogs had gotten over their dislike and tried to play with it. I put it back in place and went about my day. A day later, I walked by the guest room and saw the Raggedy Ann halfway off the bed. Now that was weird. I walked in and picked up. Same blank doll face. Same red yarn hair. It looked like every other Raggedy Ann I'd ever seen. Maybe the light blue dress could use a wash, but I didn't want to deal with that. I put it back on the bed, but I admit I side-eyed it as I left. Weird stuff kept happening. We'd find the doll in weird positions, as if we'd interrupted it as it tried to get off the bed. At some point, it did get off the bed. We found it partway to the door. The dogs wouldn't even come down the hall with me at this point, and every sense I had was telling me there was something really, really wrong with that doll. I called our local pastor to come out and pray over the house. Things quieted down. It was getting into full summer by this point, and it was stormy. We get a lot of those some years. I had just come in from putting the goats in the barn to have lunch when I heard my wife scream. My instincts kicked in, but my body was rusty, not to mention older. I rushed the hall, hit the door frame, and executed a quick sneak and peek to see what was going on. My wife was standing in the middle of the family room. I didn't see blood, and I didn't see an intruder. I came around the doorframe. That was when I saw it. The doll, that damned Raggedy Ann doll, was sitting neat and pretty in one of the rockers when I knew it had been left upstairs on the bed in a closed room. The room was cold. Too cold to be natural. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end the way it hadn't in years. I moved to my wife and held her, whispering that we needed to back up. Neither of us wanted to turn our backs on that doll. My wife started praying out loud, and that just changed everything. It felt like there was a huge pressure in the room. Just this thing. This presence. I swear to the Almighty, I heard something growl every time the name of Jesus was said out loud. There's no training covers this. Nothing I ever did or saw on the force prepared me for this, but I was a good churchgoer, and I know spiritual warfare when it stares me in the face. I started praying too, asking God to cover our house in His protection. Now, my wife, like any good Southerner, decorates with crosses. We had at least 30 decorative crosses on the family room wall. We also had my collection of antique Bowie knives. When we started praying hard, everything on the walls rattled. The crosses didn't fall. The knives did. Now, when I say fall, I mean came off the wall at an angle. I'm no physics professor, but even I know that gravity makes things go down, not across the room. And it certainly doesn't target a person. But but I wasn't even trying to call this a natural phenomenon, and I have no trouble saying that there was a demon in that doll and it tried to kill me with my own knife. It grazed me, but by that time, I was moving and covering my wife with my body as I rushed her out the door. We got out of the house and immediately called our church. God's people showed up, and we prayed the literal hell out of our house. That doll? The pastor put it in a box with a Bible, prayed over it, and tied it shut. He took it with him. I didn't care to ask where. All I knew was that it wasn't with us. Maybe he buried it on church grounds. We stayed with a neighbor that night, and the next day came back to douse the house with holy water and bless it all over again. I still walk my land reciting Bible verses when I go out to work the animals, just in case. We haven't had any problems since, but I'm not taking chances. I know it was God that got us through that, and I'm not going to be ungrateful. So maybe this story is a warning. Be careful what you bring home. You never know what's really in it. I live out in rural West Virginia on an old family farm with my mother and 3 siblings. Haven't seen my father in years and don't care to. Calling it a farm is a bit of a stretch. We haven't actually laid a crop in my lifetime. I'm not exactly sure why, but my mother told me that her father basically burned the land out and made it unusable. My mom and I have jobs at the supermarket in town, and we keep a few dozen chickens and 2 pigs for the little bit of extra income. It's not the easiest life, but I have a close family, and really, what more could you ask for? I had to save for 3 months just so I could buy an old Apesley laptop. We don't get Wi-Fi at home, so I'm here at the library in town just so I can send you this email. Over the past few weeks, things at the farm have been odd. I don't really know how to fully explain it, but everything from the weather to the animals has been slightly off. For example, we had a stretch of 4 days where not a single one of our hens laid an egg. Not one. My mother was worried, thinking maybe the feed we had purchased was filled with some kind of pesticide, or maybe they had all caught some kind of sickness. On the 5th day, I remember entering the hen house just hoping to even see a single egg. Instead, I was shocked to find 100. 100 eggs is almost double the amount of hens we have, and the idea of a hen laying 2 eggs in a day is bizarre. I'm not even sure if it is physically possible, but there they were, 100 eggs. And if I know anything, it's to not look a gift horse in the mouth. I mentioned the weather too, and here's an example. This had all happened back in mid-July, and summer nights in West Virginia are hot. Sometimes me and my younger sister would head down to the edge of the property and just hang out, kick back and look up at the stars. We were laying back trying to spot the Little Dipper when I noticed a weird, foggy haze coming from a little field not too far away. I only noticed because this patch of land seemed brighter than the darkness around it, like there was a lantern stuck in the middle of it. Curious, we went to go investigate. When we got close enough, we could see that the white haze was actually a near-perfect circle, about 50 yards wide, the curved edge of light like a solid barrier against the darkness. What's more, that haze that we saw was actually snow. Right there in the perfect circle, it was snowing big, thick snowflakes. I had to guess that it was near 85 degrees out, and obviously what we were seeing just shouldn't have been happening, but there it was. I reached my hand into the circle and immediately felt the icy chill, like it was January morning. I can't tell you how odd it is to have your hand in winter and elbow in summer. We got all excited and figured we should run back to the house and show our mom. This was too crazy to not share. She had just settled down to do some reading before bed and didn't much like the idea of going trekking outside down the hill just now, but we insisted. Of course, by the time we got back out there, the little circle of light had disappeared, and any of the snow that might stuck melted in the summer night. Our mom was super skeptical of what we were up to. We just chalked it up to crazy weather and called it a night. The last event occurred 3 days ago. I had a late shift at the store and had gotten out even later than usual due to my boss wanting to do an impromptu inventory. So I was riding my bike home at about 1 a.m. and was about to pull down the dirt road leading to the farm when I saw it. Right back outside, my house was a beaming circle of blue light shining down on the grass. It was near, if not in the same exact spot, that the snow had fallen. I thought about waking my family up to show them, but thought better of it. But I had to go check this out and see what it was. I rode my bike down the hill and pulled up a few feet short of the light. I couldn't make out where or what the light was coming from. Whatever it was had to be high up. You'd think that it could be seen from miles off, but I only saw it when I was close to the house. I was thinking about definitely going back to the house to wake up my mom when I noticed the light started moving. It wasn't moving, it was just getting wider, and I would be in it in a minute. I tried to turn my bike around and pedal away, but the light caught up to me quick. I felt it shining in my eyes and put my hands up to cover them, but it was so intense. Then nothing. The next thing I remember, I was lying in the grass next to my bike. I don't know how long I was out here or what time it was. I don't even know what happened. Not knowing what else to do, I just went back home and went to sleep. I woke up the next day feeling better than I ever remember feeling in my entire life, and still do. It's like I have an overflow of energy. I'm not particularly athletic, but I can run 2 miles now without even breaking a sweat. I get the chores done in record time, help my mom with my 2 youngest siblings, go to work, and I'm still not tired when I get home. I've been reading about all kinds of wonderful things. I checked out a few books on engineering from the library, and for some reason, all information just clicks, and I understand it. I still don't know what happened that night. I don't know what the circle of light was, or if it's even related to the new me. All I know is that I'm going to use these new gifts to get my family off this rundown farm and into a proper home. I hope you read this on your channel. Sometimes the unknown isn't so bad. I'm a retired school teacher in Illinois, and I've been a camp host since 2016. It's a relaxing job for someone who loves the outdoors. It doesn't pay much, but you can set up your camper in a picturesque location and camp for free all summer. So that really was the appeal for me. I'm there for all the campers who have problems, and to be honest, that hardly ever happens. Most weeks go by with me only talking to 1 or 2 of the campers occupying the sites. Just chit-chat, and I also make the rounds every night at dusk to sell firewood out of my pickup truck. I talked to the young couple in campsite 7 when they first arrived, and we had a nice chat. They were in their mid-20s and planned to do some hiking in the area. They had a little white dog with them, a mixed breed, I think, and they said it loved to camp. I was a little concerned one day when I didn't see the couple as I made my rounds in the evening. I took a peek again at 11:30 p.m. and they still weren't back. They told me they were staying for a week and their tent was still up and their car was there. People have to register if they plan to backcountry camp, and they hadn't registered to do that, nor had they mentioned any plans of that sort. At first, I thought maybe they had some friends in the area that had picked them up and were staying over in town for a night. But when the second night came and they still weren't back, I began to get worried. Now, I'm not a babysitter. People can come and go as they please. And at the time, I thought it was possible that I just kept missing them. After all, I couldn't see their site from my camp host site. But the next morning, after that second night, I went to clean the restrooms, and I drove by their campsite. Alarm bells immediately went off. Their little dog was there, sniffing all over the ground, and their tent had blown down. I walked over, and the dog trotted up and licked my hand, whining. He seemed so grateful to see someone. I called hello a few times, but I could tell his owners weren't in the area. So I scooped the little fellow back up and brought him back to my site to give him some food. Poor thing gobbled up a hamburger like he was starving. His coat was all dirty with twigs caught in it, and he was trembling, so I decided to call my supervisor. I reported the couple as potentially lost in the woods, and the authorities sent out a small search party. I volunteered to take care of the pup while we waited. I really felt bad for the little guy. It took almost a whole day, but I was greatly relieved when a truck rolled in with the young couple in the passenger seat. They were dirty and scratched up, and the volunteer that brought them in took me aside and said he thought they were suffering from hallucinations. He'd already radioed in that they'd been found, so I knew there would be paperwork to fill out. I lent them a couple of blankets to wrap up in and made some coffee. The woman was so happy to see her dog she burst into tears. Then they told me what had happened. The man said they'd been hiking along the ridge and their dog started barking at something behind them. He said they were afraid it was a bear since they both were carrying food in their backpacks. You're not supposed to do that, Duptu. They scooped up the dog and made a lot of noise, clapping their hands and talking loud, trying to scare it off, but then the woman spotted it. She said it absolutely was not a bear. She told her husband it looked like a gorilla, but it was smart, hiding behind the trees whenever they stopped. She was really shaken up, so he told me most of the story himself. The fellow said at first he didn't believe her. He thought her mind was playing tricks on her, but then the creature got bolder and came out in the open. He told me it had to be 7 feet tall and it had massive arms and legs, standing on 2 legs and covered in fur, all except for its face. I looked the young man in the eye as he told me this, and it was plain he believed what he was saying. I've had my share of lies told to me, being a school teacher for 27 years, but this fellow wasn't lying. He said he believed this creature was the Bigfoot. He told me it started acting aggressive, stalking them, and they had no choice but to run. The poor woman started crying as her husband told me the next part. They were so scared of the creature that when the little dog slipped out of her grasp, he grabbed her arm and wouldn't let her stop running. It was going to attack us, he said. It felt bad, but we had to get away. They wound up hiding in one of the caves up on the ridge. He said once they got to higher ground, they started throwing rocks at it and kicking logs and debris down the side of the mountain, trying to make a rock slide so it couldn't reach them. It stayed down below, making these horrible screeches of anger, he said, all through the night while they stayed up in higher elevation, trying to find shelter and stockpiling rocks and fallen limbs for ammunition. The next morning, they didn't see it and tried to find their way back, but they'd gotten so turned around when they were running, they found themselves hopelessly lost. They spent their second night up in a tree, he said, using straps on their backpacks to loop over limbs so they wouldn't fall. They were both dirty and covered in scratches, and it was not a stretch to believe they had been fighting to survive. But then the forest rangers showed up. They listened rather skeptically and suggested it was a bear. The couple disagreed, and the rangers became irritated, really tearing down their story. The man finally lost his cool and said he didn't care what they thought. It wasn't a bear, and he was going to go to the local news and report what he'd seen. That's when things got ominous. One of the many vehicles that had rolled back in with the search teams was a black SUV. No one had emerged from the vehicle until that moment. It sounds crazy, but I wonder if they had a listening device in the vehicle, because once the young man started getting irate, this fellow got out. He came up to the couple and said something in a low tone that I couldn't hear and flashed some ID. Next thing I know, he escorts them over to the SUV and they all got in, even the dog, and drove away. I asked the ranger who that was, and he looked around like he was afraid to be caught telling and mumbled, "Homeland Security." I don't know what to think of that. I never saw the couple again. I got up the next morning and their campsite was cleared out. I caught the story on the local news and it said the missing couple had been found by the search team, unhurt. All the story said was they had gotten lost in the forest. So I guess that young man never got to tell a local news what he saw after all. I've heard you read some pretty crazy stories before, so I thought, what the heck? Maybe I should write to your channel. I wasn't planning on telling this to anyone, but, well, I've been seeing the headlines lately. Maybe this isn't just me being out in the sun too long. So, I work in Big Bear City in the mountains of California. I work hospitality at one of the resorts in the area while I'm working on my degree in studio arts. I'm a landscape painter, and Big Bear is perfect for my style. The resort even has some of my canvases hanging in the reception lodge. On my off time, I spend a lot of hours hiking around Big Bear Lake. It's beautiful, with a lot of different vistas and angles to make my work interesting. The series I'm working on now is featuring the lake itself. And this is important to know because what I want to tell you happened at the lake. Big Bear had some serious snow over the winter. I mean, there were ridiculous amounts of the stuff. People's houses collapsed and you could forget about getting through the roads. And all that snow, once it melted, made the lake fuller than it had been in years. Since Big Bear Lake is a reservoir, that's a good thing. And it's a great thing for the resorts and fishermen and artists like me. I'd hiked along the alpine pedal path until I found a good wide view of the lake. I wanted a calm vista for this painting. Think Bob Ross style. Maybe it's not brilliant art, but it's relatable and people like it. I set up my portable easel out of the flow of traffic, and I got to work. The thing about being an artist is that you tend to pick up on more details than you consciously realize. I was working on the mountains around the lake more than the lake, and when I got to the water itself, I kept looking up to check how the sunlight glittered in the surface. I remembered that it was a bright day. Lots of light, right? I did a lot of scratching gold lines with my palette knife. I like to work with undertones, especially when I do water, because it adds depth and realism to the painting. So I kept working back to the blues and turquoise mixes that I had made, cutting in some gray. Painting takes longer than most people think, and the sun was starting to go down by the time I packed up. It was as I was painting this painting that I noticed something weird. I'd gotten in the zone to paint the lake, and I'd done a lot of referencing. But I'd also painted dots of red in the water. I checked the lake again just to be sure, but the lighting was bad, and I couldn't see anything weird. Now this bugged me all the way home. Why had I painted red in the water if it hadn't been there? The pattern in the painting was static, not floating on the top of the water, and I'd used a crimson as an undertone, not as a complementary element like a floating leaf. I decided I didn't want to worry about it. I had to present my portfolio the next day at class, and that was all I had to worry about. But when I set all my paintings out in chronological order in the class exhibit, I noticed something else. All of my views of Big Bear Lake had the same touches of red in the same place. Now that suggested a submerged object. I pointed the pattern out to my teacher, and he agreed that it looked like I had unconsciously referenced something under the water. The lake had been in a drought period for a few years, so it wasn't impossible that someone's fishing boat had sunk, been revealed, and then recovered by the rising water level. Not a big deal, and nothing I really cared about. Art is in the eye of the beholder, and as long as my teacher was happy, I was happy. None of that sounds weird, I know, and that's because it didn't feel weird until this next part. That pattern just kept bugging me. I wanted to see if I could find it in real life, so I headed back out to the lake. The day I managed to go was a clear but gray day. The altitude makes the sun really intense, so even though it wasn't sunny, the reflections on the lake were bright. I made sure I got to that same point along the path so that I could look at the right section of the lake. I didn't really see anything. I think the wind ruffled the surface of the water and made it impossible to see what was under. I decided to take a break and walk more along the path, thinking that maybe a different vantage point would be good. I trekked around Big Bear Lake for the rest of the morning, and by lunchtime I had managed to spot several reddish undertones under the water. Only when the conditions were right, though. At that point, I started to think that this wasn't a submerged fishing boat, because there was no way the same boat would be in all of these spaces. The only other thing I could think was that it was several boats that had all sunk, and maybe that would make more sense. But when I looked at the huge expanse of the lake, I wasn't convinced. That feeling nagged me all the way home again. I had to do something about it. Step one was checking the Friends of Big Bear Eagle Cam. One of the cameras has a great view of the whole lake. It was beautiful, but too far out to see what I was looking for. When I went to work the next day, though, I heard one of the guests saying something about drone photography. And, oh man, did that give me an idea. I had a friend who had a nice drone, not one of those cheap ones, so I should be able to get some good airtime and decent shots of the lake. He even agreed to come with me to help. I mean, what do I know about a drone? Besides, I wasn't the one with the license. Before we went, I took a map of Big Bear Lake and I marked the areas that I thought that I had seen something in red. The pattern was weird, like a triangle, with an extra leg or something. I don't even know what kind of shape that is. We waited for a good day with low wind and high visibility so air currents didn't make the water too choppy. All the hike in, I kept telling myself that I was making a mountain out of a gopher hill. It was some natural phenomenon brought on by snowmelt and maybe climate change. Or it was trash dumped in the lake. Actually, that was what I thought we were going to find. The Valley Authority was going to have fun trying to get it out, but that wasn't my problem. But in the end, it wasn't trash. It was something else. My friend piloted this drone over the spots I marked, and although the water wasn't too clear, we could see something. It was reddish, just like I had painted, deep in the water. And it wasn't 4 points like I had thought. There were actually 9. We found them as we moved the drone in a clockwise search pattern. 9 sunken fishing ships at equidistant points. Now I'm an artist. I know a pattern when I see one. This thing, whatever it was, looked like a circle marked by big red bumps. My friend thought an archaeological site had been uncovered, but I wasn't convinced. I shouldn't have noticed that red tint under the water if it was from a painted rock. It was too deep. It had to be, because I had seen red light. I was seriously starting to consider whether we should call the police or the mayor or something when the drone cam spotted something else in the center of the circle. And this thing looked weirdly reflective. Maybe metal? I don't know. While I was thinking about what to do, my friend started shouting. The drone cam was starting to fizzle out, and the drone itself was starting to bob dangerously low over the water. He tried to pilot it back in, but all of a sudden the thing just took a nosedive into the water. The camera showed nothing but static. And if that wasn't weird enough, the drone's battery had been at half. There was no reason for it to die. We didn't have time to think about what to do because all of a sudden, both of us just felt really dizzy and nauseous. I felt like I had an incredible headache coming on. Just a terrible migraine. I've never had one hit that fast. The next thing I knew, my friend was shaking me awake, and there was a group of hikers standing around us, and I was on the ground. My head felt like my brain was pushing its way out of my ears, and I couldn't talk without being sick. The hikers called emergency services, and we got taken home when we both refused medical treatment. Maybe that wasn't the best idea. Maybe we should have gone to the ER. But honestly, I doubt that they would have found anything. And I couldn't stand the idea of sitting in a brightly lit room waiting for hours for a doctor to tell me I was faking it. Now we haven't gone back to the lake since. I don't think I want to see if whatever we saw is still there. Actually, I think I'm more scared to find out that it isn't there anymore. Because if it isn't, I really don't know what it was. My Lake series paintings are going to be the last ones I ever do of Big Bear Lake. I think I'm going to stick to happy little trees in the woods from now on. I live in Northern Virginia and used to love getting out and exploring some of the lesser-known spots of the area. There's a park that almost no one knows about that's a real throwback to pre-Civil War times. There are completely untouched antebellum homesteads. There's a Revolutionary War wagon route and old Civil War trenches and quite a few random graves. I'm personally fascinated with that era, and so it's always interesting for me to look around there. It's all located along a trail behind fancy neighborhoods and golf courses. The trail is over 20 miles long, but I guess most people don't have time for that kind of history. I was there one day and I came upon an old brick chimney. There's no sign of the house that used to surround it, just the chimney. I found it in a clearing that surprisingly did not look very overgrown. And there was a little hearth in front of the chimney with a small stone fireplace opening. What struck me was how clean it looked, like someone had swept it recently. I poked around and I spotted a little trail at the edge of the clearing. I followed it into the woods about 100 feet, and I came to where there was about a 3-foot stone wall, marking out a rectangular piece of property. On one edge, I found this old stairway leading down to what I assumed was a stone cellar. There was a wooden door down there that was a little bit propped open. It started to feel creepy, but also I was fascinated, and I couldn't help but go down to take a look. I pulled the door open and turned on my flashlight. Inside, I found a wooden table and a few chairs. There were wooden shelves against the walls, and I saw old glass jars of food on the shelves. It looked like flour and cornmeal and seeds and such. There were also a few piles of stuff such as old rags and clothes. I started thinking that maybe somebody was squatting there. I shined my flashlight around, and I saw that the cellar extended far back, and there was a short passage that led to another area. I went through that to a small room that was mostly dirt, more like a hiding hole than anything. And there was also all this black powdery stuff on the floors and against the walls. In one spot, there was a little pile that looked like old rotten fruit. I didn't know what to think about that. I kept wondering if it was a person or an animal who had been hanging out there. I didn't have much more time to explore that day, so I left and went back home. So then it was probably about a month later before I was back in the area. I had had a hard day at work, and it always calmed me down to get out on the trail and let go of some of the stress. This time I found what looked like an old family graveyard, and I was trying to read the names and the dates. Some of the names were so faded that I got really into trying to figure out some of the family history. Eventually, it had gotten later than I realized and started to rain. I wasn't prepared with a hat or raincoat or anything, but this graveyard was really close to that old chimney that I had found before. I decided that I would go and wait out the rain in that cellar since I was at least a mile from my car. I was sure it wasn't going to rain for long. I found the chimney easily and headed for the cellar. The door was a bit open, just like before, and I went in and sat down in one of the chairs. Now, I always carry a notebook and a pen, so I pulled those out and my flashlight, and I started making some notes. Part of me always thought that I would eventually write a little book, a history book of the area. So I was there less than half an hour when I started hearing rustling noises. I thought maybe there was an animal down the passageway in that little room. It was just a soft rustling though, so I'm thinking maybe mice or something. But then it got louder, and then I thought I heard a weird flapping sound. So by now I'm freaking out, thinking there's a bat in there. I stuffed my things in my pockets and started heading for the door. I was glad that it had stopped raining. I made sure to leave the door open again when I went up the stairs. It was around dusk now, but I was curious about who was in there. And so I went and sat on the stone wall furthest from the cellar door. I hoped whatever it was would come out and I would see it. I didn't really think it would, but after about 10 minutes, something did start opening the door. And next, I was able to make out this shadowy shape. Okay, I was really freaking out now because it was something quite big, like 5 or 6 feet tall. Before I had much time to think, it jumped all of the steps at once. It then turned its head towards me, but I didn't see any face. But I did see these terrible, horrible red eyes that looked like they were glowing and searing right at me. I tried getting to my feet and I just tumbled backwards off the wall. I crouched down there looking over, and I kid you not, this thing spread out these huge, black, leathery-looking wings, and it half jumped, half flew up into the trees. Oh my goodness. I split out of there running as fast as possible toward my car. I'm no runner, and by the time I got there, I thought I was going to die. I finally calmed down enough to drive, but all I could think on the way home was how I had been in the cellar with that thing only like 10 feet away from me. How could that thing be real? What was it? Needless to say, I never went back down in the cellar again. I hail from a family of renowned hunters. My siblings and I grew up listening to my father's tales of exotic hunts in Africa and the time our great-grandfather fought off a 6.5-foot grizzly with nothing but a knife. So, it's no surprise that I developed a knack for the hunt at an early age. And I know that a female interested in hunting might seem unusual to some people. In Oregon, it's a lot more common than you might think. Whenever I did go hunting, it would always be in the company of either my older brother or father, who learned the tricks of the trade from his father, who learned what he knew about hunting from his father before him, and so on. It wasn't that I couldn't hunt on my own or that I needed help to do the heavy lifting, but having been on what must be hundreds of outings into the great outdoors, you soon come to learn that animals are not the only thing to be on the lookout for, and having company is a good way to be safe of the dangers that lurk in the woods. I was always going on about hunting and the outdoors to my friends, one of them who was studying forestry at Oregon State University. She told me about a hunting and forestry trail in the area that she thought was worth checking out. It was in the Corvallis area, and it belonged to a sustainable logging company. The company was nice enough to offer free permits to anybody who wanted to hunt and hike on the land. They also gave lectures at the College of Forestry at Oregon State, and this gave my friend access to the permits rather easily. But most importantly, access on the weekends, which was the quietest time to explore their property without having to worry about other hunters and hikers getting in your way. Since the permit belonged to my friend and I always took my older brother with me on my hunts, we all made reservations to explore the lands on an upcoming Saturday in March 2010. When the day finally came, I could barely contain my excitement, which was only heightened by the fact that we weren't technically permitted to hunt in March. However, if we got caught, my friend claimed to know of the perfect spot to catch deer that was far from any logging activities and free from the prying eyes of law enforcement. Not knowing her to be someone who would make something like that up, we took her on her word and we arrived at Starker Forest early in the morning. The sheer size of the land and the forests within it was astonishing. Some areas were dense evergreen forests while others were reserved for logging. Still, other areas were open spaces with thick stumps in the spots where once mighty trees stood. The majority of the forest was quiet, and the only people we encountered were loggers on the job and park rangers doing their rounds. Since visitors weren't technically permitted to explore on weekends, my friend's student card served as a handy tool to stop any suspicion. Also, our bags were big enough to conceal the one Montana X3 rifle we had hidden to hunt the deer. Dawn had come and gone with us, heading deeper into the forest, far away from any loggers and rangers. And it started to seem as though we were lost, even though my friend insisted she had taken the route before. That's when we started to find strange things, and started experiencing an overwhelming feeling that something sinister was watching us at a distance. It started with some brush that looked like it was broken and pushed aside by a very large creature, not an elk or a deer. And then we found a deer carcass, or what was left of it. Just the head and the spine that were so fresh you could still see the red in the meat. At this point, my brother had his rifle drawn, and just then our feelings of unease slowly turned into terror as the sound of footsteps became louder. We could hear that whatever it was now less than 20 feet from us, and closing the distance fast. My brother promptly responded by firing in the direction of the noise, which caused whatever it was to scream violently and become more erratic with its steps, but not slow down. And now it began to run in our direction, and we could now see the creature behind all the commotion. A huge, gaunt figure emerged from the brushes, running straight towards us. Had I not been in the woods with two other people, I would have thought I was seeing things. Slowly, the creature came into my line of sight, and I was shocked to see a giant wolf that was running on its hind legs like a human. Its head was that of a typical wolf, but its body was more like that of a distorted person, similar to what you see in werewolf movies. It howled in agony, almost tumbling down as it charged towards us, with its howl almost sounding like the screams of a man. While my friend and I paused in fear, my brother was quick to react, and he fired off a round from the rifle. This caused the creature to veer off course and run for cover into the trees. Although it was only a warning shot, it definitely scared the creature away. I was disheveled and almost scared to death, but managed to check the time, seeing it was 7 o'clock at night. We instantly said it would be wise if we left the area immediately, before the creature decided to come back and tried its luck a second time. We were intercepted by 2 rangers as we made a run for what we hoped was the exit. And although hunting off-season is a punishable offense, after seeing how shaken up we were escorted to the property gate with only a warning. "Must be karma, you all running into a predator out there," the one ranger said to us. "What did you see out there anyway, kids?" We all looked at each other for a split second before I said, "A bear. We came across a bear." I knew that none of us would want to open the can of worms by telling him what we really saw. But my thought is, he already knew.